Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be another one of those cases that there really is not a lot of information, and the possibilities of what could have happened to this poor girl are honestly just endless. And this entire case will leave you feeling frustrated for what happened or what didn't happen or how little information we know. It's another one of those cases where you have to wonder if the right people acted at the right time, would this case be solved? So with that being said, today we are going to be going over the unsolved disappearance of Rebecca Coriam. Rebecca Coriam was born March 11th, 1987 in Chester, England. Her parents were Mike and Anna Maria Coriam. She had a sister named Rachel, and she had two foster brothers. She was described as happy, friendly, and upbeat. She went to Chester Catholic High School and worked at the Chester Zoo. When she would go on break, she would always visit her grandparents. She was extremely close with them, and she always had a good time when she got to visit them. At one point, she also worked at the DoubleTree by Hilton with her sister Rachel, and she made a ton of friends there, and she kept in contact with a ton of different friends, and she overall just had a great time working there. She joined the British Army Cadets and then went on to study sports sciences at Plymouth University. She also attended Liverpool Hope University, where she studied youth studies. Then she went on to run a sports camp in Maine here in the US. Rebecca loved running, biking, swimming, playing basketball, riding horses, staying fit, and overall just being extremely active. In June of 2010, Rebecca decided to go to London to interview for a position in the Disney Cruise Line. She was one of hundreds of other applicants. This was extremely competitive of a job, but with her outgoing and bubbly personality, she was offered a position. Rebecca was extremely excited to work on the Disney cruise ship. I mean, she got the opportunity to travel the world, to be paid to go to all these different countries. To do her training, she went to a Disney theme park in Florida. She originally worked for about 4 months on a ship that went to the Bahamas, but she then went back home and took about 2 months off just to relax and spend time with her friends and family. After this break, she went back to work for Disney Cruise Line, and she actually ended up on a ship called the Disney Wonder, which was based in Los Angeles. This ship went through the Mexican Riviera and the Panama Canal. Obviously, this was extremely exciting, getting to go to all these different countries and be paid for it. While working on the ship, Rebecca maintained pretty much constant contact with her family. She was always using Facebook and Skype to keep contact with her family, and honestly, her family was pretty secure knowing that she was working on a ship, because this seemed like an extremely safe way to travel the world on this ship with trusted people. The specific job that Rebecca had on the Disney Wonder was as a youth worker in the kids club, which was basically like where the parents would drop off their children during the day and then the parents would go off and do their own thing. And this honestly seemed like the perfect job for Rebecca. It perfectly matched her upbeat and outgoing personality. Now, while Rebecca was working on the Disney Wonder, her grandfather unfortunately passed away. So she decided to go home for a few weeks to attend the funeral and just visit with her friends and family. Little did anyone know, but this would be the very last time anyone would see Rebecca. On March 21st, 2011, 24-year-old Rebecca headed back out onto sea on the Disney Wonder. As always, Rebecca maintained constant contact with her mother through Facebook, and they were messaging on Facebook, and she said that the next day that Rebecca was going to call her on Skype just to kind of check in, tell her how everything was going. However, that call would never be made. When the ship pulled out of the port of Los Angeles, everything seemed perfectly fine. In the early morning hours of March 22nd, the ship was heading towards the coast of Mexico. Rebecca's mother was starting to worry because it had been quite a while since Rebecca had responded, and she never got the call that she was expecting from Rebecca. She just waited and waited, but grew more and more worried as the day went on, and she still didn't hear from Rebecca. Now, that night, Rebecca's mother did receive a phone call. However, it was not from Rebecca. Disney had called her to tell her that Rebecca was missing. Her mother obviously was in full-on panic mode at this point, trying to figure out what possibly could have happened to Rebecca. She was supposed to be safe and secure on this ship, but suddenly, she was just gone. Now, the night before March 22nd, so the late hours of March 21st, Rebecca was just hanging out at the boat's bar, just hanging out and drinking with some friends. She did have a shift the next morning around 9 a.m., so March 22nd, but Rebecca didn't show up for her shift that day, so this is when the crew knew that something was off. The crew did go out and try to find her. However, they searched her room and she wasn't there. They tried calling her over the intercom. They looked in all these different places around the ship, but there was just absolutely no sign of Rebecca. This led the crew to looking at the security footage that they had on the boat. Now, the security footage is pretty terrible quality, so I apologize, but on the security footage, they actually saw Rebecca on Deck 1, which is the crew's quarters, on the ship's internal phone, making a phone call. This was at around 5:45 that morning. In this footage, she seemed upset, worried, and frantic. They assumed that she must have been having a pretty upsetting phone call, that it was maybe an argument, but there was no way that they could really be sure. The footage also showed a man who walked by Rebecca, stopped and asked Rebecca if she was okay, and you could see her saying, "Yeah, fine," so the guy just continued on. After this, she hangs up the phone, walks away. She kind of runs her fingers through her hair and kind of pushed it back. And then she put her hands in her back pockets and then walked off. Her parents later said that these were pretty common mannerisms of Rebecca, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Of course, after finding out that Rebecca was missing, her parents flew to Los Angeles to the port so that they could be there when the boat showed up. Now, what was weird is when they were being driven to this port, they were in a car with completely tinted and blacked out windows, and they were brought to this little side entry on the boat so that they could discreetly get on without being seen. Now, Mike and Anna Maria were expecting the FBI to be on this case, but the parents were actually told that no U.S. organizations would be getting involved whatsoever.
We automatically assumed as well that the authorities would get on board the ship when it docked, but they didn't. It's not their jurisdiction. That's when we started thinking, what's something not right here? And then we started realising it comes under flags of convenience and where the ship is registered.
Now, this is where it gets extremely confusing and frustrating, because since it was a cruise ship and they were on international waters, it's really hard to kind of determine who would get involved in this case and who wouldn't. So that's pretty much why the FBI wouldn't take on this case, apparently. Now, Disney did not cease all tourism on these ships. The boat actually showed up to the port of LA 3 days after Rebecca went missing, and they just unloaded and reloaded the ships as normal and continued on their schedule as normal. Now, I understand why they wouldn't want to lose a bunch of money or inconvenience patrons, but honestly, this is someone's life. People can reschedule their vacations so that police can perform a proper investigation. People can be refunded. Disney is a giant corporation. They can stand to lose a couple $1,000s so that they can postpone the next trip and conduct a proper investigation. So when Anna Maria and Mike got to the ship, they went over to talk to the captain to find out what he thought happened. The captain said that Rebecca may have had an upsetting phone call, went up to the 5th deck, was sitting on the edge of the deck, and then maybe a giant wave came up and swept her away. So, of course, the parents went up to the 5th deck to see it for themselves. And the railing was extremely high. It was about as tall as them. So there's no way that Rebecca could have just easily went up and sat on the edge of the ship.
Well, I asked the captain, I said, what do you think may have happened to Rebecca? And his words were that she'd, obviously made this phone call, walked then onto the deck 5, probably tried to gather her thoughts and sat along the side, and a wave could have come and locked the ship and taken her over.
And you went to that deck?
They took us to the deck.
And what did you make of the possibility of it being dangerous, that there could have been some sort of accidents?
We didn't think that was possible. I had to get underneath at least a 4-foot veil where there was a huge metal ledge, and I couldn't see over it. It was really quite high. I couldn't see how anyone could have gone over, or if they wanted to take their own life even would have gone over it from that particular part of the ship.
Disney didn't have any cameras on that area of the ship, but Disney is confident that she just went over the ledge. They basically refused to acknowledge any idea of foul play. They didn't even want to think about the possibility that one of their employees could have done something to her. Now, there was a police officer from the Royal Bahamas Police Force that came out to conduct an investigation, but they were told that he only had 1 day to investigate the ship. Like I said, Disney Cruise Line didn't want to interrupt their schedule, so he didn't have really any time to investigate. Now, if you've ever seen a cruise ship or been on a cruise ship, you would know just how massive these boats are. It would literally be impossible to thoroughly search these boats in just 1 day. And I guess this detective did his best, but he only interviewed a few crew members and none of the passengers. Now, 2 months after Rebecca's disappearance, the bank emailed Rebecca's parents to notify that there was activity on Rebecca's credit card. Of course, this gave a new hope to Mike and Anna Maria, but they were just unsure what to believe. They knew that there was every possibility that this was just some other random person that was using the card and not Rebecca. When asked about this new development, Disney basically just said that they were doing whatever they could to get to the bottom of this, but unfortunately, nothing ever came of this lead. Now, in September of 2011, Rebecca's uncle tried to get onto Rebecca's Facebook. He wanted to see if there was anything on her account that could point any answers to what may have happened to Rebecca, but it actually showed that her password was changed recently. This was extremely confusing because no one could figure out who changed this password or why it was changed. It could have been Rebecca that changed this password, but it could have been someone else. Just like with the credit card, this wasn't really looked into much, and Rebecca's father didn't know if he wanted to believe that it was Rebecca or someone else. He honestly didn't know what to believe at all because who knows what this even means. Now, obviously, you would think that activity on her Facebook, activity on her credit card would be huge to this case. And in a way, it could discredit the entire theory that Rebecca just washed away by a wave. This very well could have been Rebecca, or it could have been someone else that did something to her. Now, the credit card, it's not crazy because obviously someone could have just found this random credit card and used it. But with her Facebook, what random person would go into this girl's Facebook and just know the password somehow and then just decide to change it? You would have to know Rebecca's personal information in order to go in and change the password to this Facebook account. So it couldn't have just been a random person. So it's absolutely ridiculous that this wasn't looked into. We will never know what these different leads could have meant because no one bothered to look into it. Now, the family was actually supposed to receive a final report from the Bahama Police Department, but they never actually received a final copy at all. Then this case was taken over by the British police, but they wouldn't really give up any information either because they said that it contained sensitive personal information. It's just a little strange to me how tight-lipped everyone was being, that the Bahama Police Department refused to give them the final report that they were promised, and then when it was moved over to the British police, they did the same thing. They didn't want to give out any of the information in this case. I mean, it's been years and this girl is missing and nobody knows where she is. So I don't know any personal information that could have been in there that wouldn't be worth sharing with her own family so that they could possibly connect it or use it to find her. Now, there's a journalist named John Ronson who really wanted to get to the bottom of this case and find out exactly what really happened. He decided to go onto a Disney cruise ship and take the exact same route that Rebecca would have taken. When he did this, he decided to go ahead and interview a bunch of the different crew members that were on the ship at the same time that Rebecca went missing. Now, as you'd expect, a lot of the crew members were acting extremely strangely. A lot of them seemed extremely nervous to talk to him, and a lot of them were saying that there was a lot more to the story, but they just had to keep it quiet. Some of the crew members got defensive and were just like, she fell off the boat. Disney knows exactly what happened. There's no more to this story. One of the bartenders actually said, it didn't happen. But you know that's the answer that I have to give. After walking around and scoping out the ship, Ronson actually found out that the fourth deck was probably the most likely for someone to have fallen off the edge because the bars were lower. And Rebecca would have often been on this deck because there was a track so that she could run and exercise, which she did pretty much every day. However, this deck did have a lot of cameras, so if she did fall off this deck, then the camera would have captured it. So we don't really know unless Disney has some footage that they just don't want to share. Now, the last thing I want to mention on Ronson's little investigation into this boat, one of the crew members actually explained that even though the bars were high, that someone could have easily slipped off this deck if it were slippery. And they said that they actually had to help a friend that was going through the same thing. So obviously, we don't really know. This one crew member seems to think that it's very possible, but most other crew members seemed very uneasy and unwilling to talk to him. Now, on the day before the first anniversary of Rebecca's disappearance, her father, Mike, got an email from a woman who claimed to have seen Rebecca with a dark-haired man on the streets of Venice, Italy. She said that she could only be about 85% sure that it was Rebecca, but that she saw the website that her parents had put up for Rebecca and that she immediately recognized her. Her dad, again, is not 100% sure what to even think of this email. He thinks it seems credible, but he wasn't really sure. It could just be someone playing a joke. It could very easily be someone that misidentified her. So now I'm going to kind of get into the theories on what could have happened to Rebecca. So obviously the first theory here is what Disney and the police seem to believe, is that Rebecca just slipped off the boat. Now, we know that the last crew member that John Ronson interviewed said that despite the high guardrails, it's very easy to slip off the ship if there are rough water conditions and if the deck is slippery. Also, we know that there have been plenty of people before who have fallen off of cruise ships. It's absolutely not unheard of. Plus, there were reports that Rebecca's flip-flops were actually found on the fifth deck after she had fallen off, but this was actually disproven and found to just be another random pair of flip-flops that actually had a different crew member's name on it. So that doesn't really show anything, but I do know that that was like a huge thing that everyone was saying, but it was disproven. Plus, when the records were looked into of the water conditions that night, the conditions showed that the water was completely normal. There weren't any giant choppy waves that could have just come up and swept her away. Now, even if there was these giant waves that could have come up and swept her away, it's thought that if there were these waves, there would have been damage left to the boat. If she did fall off the boat, it's more likely that she could have either jumped or that maybe someone threw her off. Now, I'm just going to touch on the theory that she may have jumped. We know that she had what seemed to have been a distressing phone call right before she went missing. We also know that her grandfather had recently passed away and she was extremely close with her grandfather. There are also reports that she was in a very rocky relationship and that things were not going great in this relationship. This relationship was described as being really great one moment, but then really bad the next. Maybe all of this was just making her extremely overwhelmed and upset. Things were just building up in her life, and she just decided to throw herself off the ship in an area where she knew that no one would see her. However, her parents and everyone around her say that she was never depressed, never suicidal. She was always this upbeat and positive person. She never seemed to be in any sort of real distress before this phone call. So it's not very likely that she would just receive this phone call and then just get so upset that she would just decide to throw herself off the boat. Plus, she had just gotten tickets for her family to visit Disney in Paris. So she spent all this money and had all these plans for her family to visit her in Paris. So why would she just go kill herself right before then? Now, the other theory within this theory of her falling off the boat is that someone may have thrown her over. I think in terms of looking at it as did she commit suicide or did she jump, I think this is the most likely, but in terms of logistics, I do not think it's very likely. Now, as we saw earlier, the crew members were being extremely sketchy when being interviewed. Plus, we don't even really know who any of these workers are. So it's hard to say if these were good people or bad people. And beyond that, none of the actual passengers were interviewed, so we don't even know if there had been any sketchy characters that were passengers. So it's possible that someone with ill intentions could have decided to throw Rebecca over the boat. Maybe she had gotten into a horrible argument with a coworker. Maybe there was a passenger that was just extremely upset over something that maybe she did when she was watching their children or something like that. So they threw her over the boat. Maybe if it was a crew member, they knew exactly where to go because they knew that there was no cameras there, so they would not be caught. They could have also waited till like the middle of the night, so we saw her on the phone at 5:45 a.m., so maybe it was right after that, and they knew that no one would be up at that time to see anything happen. Now, obviously, we have to wonder how someone would just be able to hoist her up and throw her over a high railing. She probably would have been fighting and kicking and yelling. So how would someone be able to take complete control over her enough to lift her up and throw her? This honestly does not seem very plausible. Another theory is that a crew member could have taken her off the ship without anyone seeing. Now, police thought that there was absolutely no way that this could have happened. However, I think that it could be possible. Someone who knows the ship extremely well could have gotten her off the ship without being seen. They could have gotten out in a huge crowd or avoided being seen some other way. We know that human sex trafficking is a huge problem, especially in very touristy places. We know that these people are extremely skilled in being able to take people without leaving any sort of evidence without being seen. And we also know that Rebecca's father received that email of someone saying that they recognized Rebecca in Venice, Italy, which would support this theory. But again, it is very possible that someone could have just mistaken her as Rebecca and that it was a completely different person, or it could have just been a sick joke and completely made this up. The last theory is that Rebecca was murdered on the ship and that her body was then dumped either by being thrown overboard or being removed off of the ship some other way. Labour Member of Parliament Chris Mattinson believes this theory. He says that he has a copy of the original police report and that a lot of information in this police report points in that direction. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott also believes that she was murdered and then thrown off of the ship. Now you have to wonder how someone would just take this entire girl, her dead weight, and just hoist it over the ship. Like I said, the bars were pretty much at eye level, so they would have had to get her over their head and then throw her off that way. So it's kind of unlikely that someone would have been able to just do this by themselves. So if she was murdered and then thrown overboard, there was probably more than one person involved. Even if she was removed another way. And again, we know that when being interviewed, these crew members were extremely sketchy and nervous and pretty much unwilling to speak. So it makes sense that if one of their fellow crew members murdered this girl and they know that they're not supposed to say anything because either Disney doesn't want to get a bad rep or whatever the reason be, it makes sense that they would act sketchy. Now, a lot of people believe that Disney knows exactly what happened and that they are just covering it up. Either they don't want a bad name, they don't want to be known as the cruise ship who had someone murdered on it. And honestly, I think that that is a very high possibility. I mean, think of how much money they would lose if they were known as the ship where a girl was murdered. Not many people would want to return, so it makes sense that they would just want to hide it and conceal it as much as possible. Maybe they paid off the police to keep quiet. Maybe they paid off the crew members or threatened the crew members to stay quiet. We don't know, and honestly, I don't know if we will ever know. So that's pretty much all of the information I have on this case. There is literally almost no information and no one even really looked into it. Usually with these cases, I have one theory that I believe in the most. I usually think that there's one theory that the most information points to, but with this one, I literally have zero idea of what to think. It's pretty obvious to me that Disney didn't want this getting out. They just didn't seem to care or seem to want to even get this case figured out. It's honestly extremely sad how little effort was put into finding Rebecca. Like I said, I do think that it's possible that whatever happened to Rebecca, Disney is trying to cover up, but beyond that, I don't know what they're trying to cover up. I don't know if they even know exactly what happened. All I know is that something happened to Rebecca. They know that something happened to Rebecca on their ship, and they don't want it getting out. What do you guys think happened? I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that she just fell off the ship and was swept away by a giant wave? Do you think that she was thrown off the boat by someone else? Do you think that she really did jump off the boat and want to commit suicide? Do you think that she could have been taken off the boat somehow without being seen? Or do you think that maybe she was murdered on the boat? Or do you think something completely different? Please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If I did miss anything or get anything wrong, please let me know. Like I said, there was not a lot of information and it was kind of difficult researching because we don't really know anything and there wasn't a ton of reports on it. So like I said, if you know anything that I did not include in this video, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Well, that is all I have for this video today. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this case. Like I said, please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if there's any other case suggestions you have that you would like to see me cover on this channel, please let me know in the comments below. If you did like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. With that, I hope you guys have a great week and I hope to see you next time. Bye!